Alright, we just reviewed Intel's highest-end Panther Lake CPU, the Core Ultra X9, and guys, it is fantastic. The best thing that has come out of a CPU manufacturer in years. One of the great things, of course, about it is the new B390 integrated GPU. We found it performed similar to a low-end dedicated GPU like, say, an RTX 4050 or 5050, at least at lower wattage. But in that video, we only tested 3 games and a bunch of synthetic benchmarks. Those are games that do a good job of showing how a GPU performs versus others, but they're certainly not the games that many of you are playing, including me, guys. So today we are back, and we're going to show you how the X9 performs in 10 of the most popular titles at various different settings. We're going to start with graphically intensive ones, and we're going to walk our way down to esports titles. Now, we're once again going to be using the ZenBook Duo because it has the highest end Panther Lake chip, and it can actually run it at full power. 45 watts sustained. If you did see our initial review, you may have noticed that in Forza, the Duo performed a little better on its standard mode. We actually retested this and we found its highest performance mode was indeed better, and that is the mode that we're going to use today throughout the testing. All of our other tests from that original video were on performance mode, so nothing else for me to bring up on that one. Alright, Arc Raiders, a fairly demanding title. The game can run well on low to medium settings. That's on the display's native resolution of 2880 by 1800. We used XeSS upscaling to achieve these results. Intel has several options available. Ultra Performance renders at the lowest base resolution, so it gives you the most frames, but the least visual quality. Ultra Quality, on the other hand, does the opposite. It renders at a higher base resolution, so the game looks better, but you don't get as many extra frames. Now, you may be wondering why we just didn't run the game at a lower resolution. Surely it will be fine on a small 14-inch display, particularly say 1440 by 900, which is a quarter of this display's native resolution. 2 issues with this approach. Firstly, you'd lose the anti-aliasing that upscaling provides, so diagonal lines and edges, they just wouldn't appear as sharp. Secondly, the UI elements would be a bit fuzzy, like your ammo counter or mini-map. With upscaling, the UI is actually rendered at the display's native resolution. It's only the gameplay itself that is upscaled. Back on Arc Raiders, we found XeSS Ultra Performance at medium settings was the best balance of visual fidelity and playability, an average FPS close to 70 and 1% lows of 44. If you do want more frames, you can drop down to low settings. On that setting, you can even up XeSS a notch to performance. We felt the bump up in visual quality of medium settings was worth the performance hit. Now, on all settings we tried, we did notice some occasional hitching in this game. You'd be running around and there was a sudden stutter. Unreal Engine 5 games, they are notorious for such issues, and that is well documented. We also noticed this in Fortnite, which is another UE5 game. We actually tested that game on a much more powerful gaming laptop, the Asus Zephyrus G16 with the 5070 Ti. It also exhibited the occasional micro stutter, so likely not an Intel issue. Next up, we have the 2025 award-winning game Clair Obscur Expedition 33. This title is really hitting the limit of what this X9 processor can handle. Even on the lowest possible settings, you're still getting sub 60 frames per second on average. That being said, this game is still somewhat playable. We had a little debate about this one in the office. You see, all of us agree that for a title like this one that isn't a fast-paced game, you can get away with less frames. That being said, I wouldn't want to play on anything that didn't hit around 50 to 60 FPS on average. Now, Seth and Sierra felt lower is okay. That's if you're used to console or handheld gaming where you can get less than 60 FPS. Now, if you are going to play Clair on this hardware, we recommend setting XeSS to performance. You see, even though you lose a couple of frames, on Ultra Performance, the game just lacked clarity. On that note, we did find the visual fidelity looked a good amount better if you step up to the game's medium settings, especially lighting. I'm going to call a spade though. The integrated GPU in the X9, it really isn't going to give you the experience you probably want in this game. Next, we tried Space Marine 2. We knew this one was going to be rough going in, so we only tried the lower settings with FSR upscaling set to Ultra Performance. Unfortunately, Space Marine 2, it doesn't support Intel's native XeSS. Frame rates were a little below 60 FPS and 1% lows were below 40. That being said, it didn't look horrendous and it was playable. It's only once you compare its image quality to a higher-end gaming laptop that you can really see what you're missing out on. On the Zephyrus G16 with a 5070 Ti on high settings, you can just see how much detail is lost on the Duo. The Duo's image looks really soft by comparison. Next we tried Monster Hunter Wilds. This game is just too much for this hardware no matter what settings you run on. On the lower settings, sure, it was a little more playable, but on those settings it just looked ugly and blurry and it was still a bit choppy. Alright, we then tried Call of Duty Warzone. We tried the basic preset, which is one up from the lowest, as well as the next best, which is balanced. Average FPS was pretty decent on both. However, this is a fast-paced competitive shooter. If you're just trying to have a bit of fun, sure, you can enjoy gaming on this processor. If you're playing competitively though, we wouldn't recommend it. The 1% lows and 0.1% lows are just too rough. Next we tried the Cyberpunk benchmark. It's an older title, so its average FPS and 1% lows were pretty decent at lower settings with upscaling on. Just a little note on its benchmark, we did notice this weird visual artifact across the bottom of the screen when we turned on XeSS. This did not occur though in actual gameplay. Alright, on to esports titles, starting with the Marvel Rivals benchmark. This is a surprisingly heavy game and we did have to drop right down to its lowest settings to get above 60 FPS on average. When using XeSS Ultra Performance, objects in motion though, they had a lot of temporal artifacts. They just didn't look clear. Obviously not ideal for competitive play. The issue is, if you just change XeSS to performance and keep the other game settings, you're below 60 FPS. Once again, if you just want to have a bit of fun on an Ultrabook, yes, it is playable, but if you are serious about this game, this hardware just isn't good enough. Now, in the latest version of XeSS, Intel supports multi-frame generation, up to 3 AI-generated frames for every real one. Marvel Rivals and Cyberpunk, they do support this, so we tried it in our original video. Unsurprisingly, we got more average frames, but we didn't get better 1% lows, which is what you probably want more. This is a common issue on frame generation, and it does happen on gaming laptops too with higher end GPUs from Nvidia. That's where the 1% lows don't improve with frame generation. Also, and more importantly, if your base frame rate is below 60, as it is with a lot of games on this hardware, the input lag becomes very noticeable. Next up we have Fortnite. It was very playable. We weren't even running on its lowest possible settings. We used medium with XeSS unbalanced. The average frame rates and 1% lows were pretty good. You can even go up to high settings if you turn off Nanite and Lumen. You may notice in our results that 0.1% lows were really rough. We actually tested Fortnite on the same Zephyrus with a 5070 Ti that we used for Space Marine testing that I showed you earlier. It also got very bad 0.1% lows in Fortnite at the same game settings as the Duo. Just look at the drop down from the average to 0.1%, 170 frames per second down to 34. Once again, we feel this is an Unreal Engine 5 thing and our testers said it didn't affect playability. Before we leave Fortnite, we've tested a lot of games with upscaling on, as you've seen throughout this video. If you're wondering if you need to do that, here's Fortnite rendered at the display's native resolution without upscaling. XeSS, as you can see, it does make a big difference. On this kind of hardware, it's kind of clutch, unless you're playing something like Counter-Strike. On that note, on Counter-Strike 2, we tested on medium settings and we didn't use upscaling. The results were really good. Even 0.1% lows were above 60 FPS, so Counter-Strike 2, unsurprisingly, very playable and enjoyable on this hardware. Finally, I played my game, League of Legends. Obviously, I expected it to run very well. If you're unaware, I play a lot of competitive League, just way too much. So I kind of tested it from that angle. I ran on medium settings on the screen's native resolution and I got pretty good results, above 60 FPS even for 1% lows. But I have a cherry on top for you. The results that you are seeing on screen right now are actually while I was simultaneously streaming to Twitch. This Asus Duo, it's a dual screen laptop, so it is ideal for something like that. And guys, seriously, isn't it amazing that this laptop can even do this? Now, I did actually try several other League settings earlier in the day, but I realized I was gaming on battery, and I didn't even know I was gaming on battery. If you've ever experienced gaming on battery on an Nvidia laptop, you definitely notice the moment you are unplugged. Performance, it just drops through the floor. Well, with this laptop, performance is identical on battery. As I said, I didn't even know I was unplugged. And Sierra, she said the same thing, who also accidentally played a couple of rounds of Fortnite unplugged. So, the only thing remaining is how long can you game on battery? Well, Seth ran the Forza benchmark on repeat until the laptop died with a screen at 300 nits of brightness on its highest performance mode. As mentioned, it pulled the full 45 watts the entire time. Unfortunately though, it only lasted an hour and a half. This makes sense, as it has a 99 watt-hour battery, 45 watts, plus another 20 or so for the rest of the laptop, and bang, you get around 1.5 hours. But hold your horses. Depending on your game, you may be able to run on standard performance mode for better battery life. In a GPU-heavy game like Forza, you only lose around 8% of gaming performance for a big saving in power draw that's on that mode. You see, on standard performance mode, the laptop draws 35 watts. Now, this may be a bit crippling though for CPU-dependent games, as we found that's where most of the power saving comes from. Anyway, this leads me to my final point. As a team, we all feel that this processor is going to be phenomenal in a handheld. You see, handhelds have significantly lower resolution screens to drive. We're actually thinking of doing a video where we test a Panther-like laptop with settings that essentially make it a gaming handheld, just to show you what you can expect. Now, if that sounds interesting to you, just drop a comment down below. With that said, let's wrap. Overall, Intel have done a phenomenal job here. This GPU is way better than any other integrated GPU for a gaming thin and light. Yes, AMD has Strix Halo, but that's still just really hard to find. It's just not in a lot of laptops. In fact, if you're picking between a laptop with an X9 processor and a lower wattage NVIDIA GPU, I'd definitely get the X9. As we demonstrated in our original video, that chip is just much more power efficient than NVIDIA's ones. That's why you can game at full performance when unplugged. This being said, let's call it as it is. The X9 chip, it still delivers basic gaming performance. It's very good in less demanding titles, but in demanding ones, games are barely playable, as we showed you. So it certainly doesn't unseat a mid-range gaming laptop with something like an RTX 5060. In fact, that leads me to how I want to end this video. I want to end it with a challenge to Intel. Do what AMD did with Strix Halo and come out with a beefier version of this GPU with 40 cores rather than 12. That would just really put the hurt on NVIDIA, and right now, given how anti-gamer NVIDIA seems to have become, people would just switch to Intel in droves. Anyway, with that said, if you're in the market to buy a laptop right now, make sure to check out our website bestlaptop.deals. Over there we are demystifying laptop shopping. We even have this new filter so you can quickly find all these new Panther Lake laptops. Get subscribed with the notification bell on. We have a lot more reviews coming and videos coming on these new laptops. Till next time, go do something awesome with your day, and I will catch you later. Josh out.